Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Terry Hill. I'm a partner in the firm's advisory group. I lead our CFO practice, and in that capacity, we spend a great deal of time helping owners and CEOs and principals of businesses tell their story, both internally and to external stakeholders. Very early on, there was a lot of curiosity and some confusion around the CARES Act, around the SBA, and how did you apply? What did that process look like? Once you've got the funding, what does forgiveness look like? And how do you tell your story about forgiveness? And all of those are natural. And of course, we wanted to start part of today's presentation with an update there, and we'll certainly answer some of the Q&A. But we were compelled pretty quickly to begin to include in these conversations what I'll just call a commentary around, well, what's beyond the SBA? And I think the basic theme here is that, of course, the SBA is a good thing. The government stepped in. The banks have done their best to make the funding available in an expedient fashion. But all of our businesses have been existentially affected. And so what really does that do? And how do you understand it? And how do you act upon it? And Sven's done a really nice job of introducing, at least at a high level, that alongside the inputs you have from knowing your business, there's great value in contextualizing some of that with some prognostication of when do we best think this will all sort of get repaired, and what is that rate of emergence and rate of increase look like. So I want to dive a little bit. This is certainly not going to be a lesson on how to build a cash flow forecast, but I did want to cover a few basic things. One of those is, once we're past the basic mechanics of the SBA, certainly it's been our encouragement to get right back to what was the strategy before, right? And obviously people on this phone that are nonprofit organizations, maybe venture-backed companies, principally held businesses that have been around for decades, all of you are going to be affected differently and have different needs, but it's important centrally to understand that we got to get back to what was the strategy and has that been affected, right? Hopefully, some of the information you glean from Sven's work and from some form of a forecast and a cash flow model will inform what you do with your strategy at this point. Anecdotally, we've talked to a great many companies, probably almost 100 at this point in the last 30 days as a group, and some are. They have an increased resolve. We've seen some innovation in spite of the virus, where people have done new things in their business and in fact accelerated prior mandates that just were sitting on the shelf, and it's really delightful to see that. Others have changed plans, right? This may be a really existential event, and it's important to understand what that means and how to guide decision making in the very near term, and we'll talk about that. Underpinning all of this is just the fact that every one of us, for various reasons, has had the ability to, before all this, to tell their story, leverage people and systems inside the organization to come up with a forecast, sometimes it's a board package, some sort of information that guides decision support. And I think that this trigger event, this COVID pandemic, has certainly put a very steep focus on needing to do that, and needing to do that probably really, really well, and maybe at a level we haven't really needed to before. And really the goal is to achieve basic visibility at least. Confidence comes next, and then decision support is really what guides you to making some real-time decisions. So Maggie, let's do next slide, please. And what we're really getting at here is what's going to happen, not now, of course, but in June, July, August, and September. And what is it going to take to weather that storm? What are working capital requirements going to look like? And if you do a good enough job of digging a little deeper into the data, you may very well find that there are things you thought worked well that do not, and things that you thought weren't profitable or weren't effective in driving the organization that are indeed worthy of further investment. So very, very important to get a handle on that. Take whatever you have. I think if you haven't built much of a forecast at all, I think starting with a basic version of one will provide you with a great deal of high level visibility into what may be working and where you really have to focus your energy. For those that have one that may be a little bit high level, it's certainly a good time to get deeper into what may look a lot more like a rolling 13 or 26 week forecast. This is a deeper dive. They can become very, very granular, but in its essence, it's a what does the picture look like 3 months out? And let's just keep refreshing that on a weekly basis if possible. And that helps you understand, well, what does June, July, August look like? And have I done enough with furloughs, with maybe some terminations and leaves, and or do I need to do more? So it's going to look different for everybody, but I think this is certainly a time that we've got to get much more visible to what's working and what isn't, and what are the levers in the business that can drive cash now and cash in the near future, and beyond the SBA, what really are your working capital requirements? At the very least, this will fuel internal discussion and internal action. It certainly is going to become very important for bank covenants and other external constituents. I think we'll circle back to Brett with regard to the sort of corroborating the forgiveness part of the SBA, and all of this is intertwined, right?
So I want to interject, if I could, before we lose you, Terry, on this. Given what you've just said, there are a couple questions that have come along really that are regarding best practices for accounting for to ensure loan forgiveness, but also in terms of emerging. And what would you recommend regarding those best practices?
Well, so, and is the question, do we think, Edward, about the actual accounting of this, the income statement, or just properly tracking cash?
Well, I think that it starts really with loan forgiveness and what we have to do to, what people have to do in order to get that. And then what does that look like going forward?
Sure. Well, so at the very least, within the loan forgiveness paradigm, you're going to have to track payroll, which is a good thing, right? A deeper dive into your people costs certainly will be a big component, depending on exactly what your business is, for a cash forecast and what your working capital demands will be. The other piece of it is just facilities and utilities. Also, if you look at the quick hits, sort of near-term good targets for really creating cash with what your prior activities would have drum up. So in my second to last bullet, I talk about negotiating, right? You have people around you, you have landlords, you have vendors, you have customers. I think most of you probably have already begun this naturally, but really truly begin to get very focused on negotiating with the people you can. Be very careful with long-term important relationships, but landlords are important. Common area maintenance, for those of you that haven't, is often an area where there are disputes. It's not necessarily a source of near-term cash, but there are often material amounts of money hidden in the resolution of a CAM account, right? This is the part of a landlord relationship that they're not going to voluntarily give you the money back, but there's a very easy method for communicating and resolving an overhang of cash coming back to the business. The other two really, really big existential things that I think we've got to focus on is, one, however you bill your customers for products and services, do not allow any delay in that, right? Cash conversion cycle is where all of this begins. And then once you've created the AR, you've got to collect on it, right? And that goes right back to negotiating, right? Those conversations will be different with every client. I think it's good to get way out ahead of that and understand where there may be strain and how you'd manage what's going to be probably some diminished collection rate in your business, like everyone. No one here is immune.
Thank you. Terry, that's a pretty cautionary observation. How does that translate? As you're looking at this and you're thinking about your clients, what does that mean? What kind of counsel do you provide?
Yeah, I think that this is where having a more granular view of how leading indicators in your business are being affected in a 13-week, as an example, cash flow forecast, you're going to know when billings are diminished, and of course, collections will be soon to follow. And if you compound a diminishing of billings and then a sort of pushing out of collections, obviously you've got a significant working capital pinch. So it's really important to understand how all of these will interplay and at what point you need to potentially have a different strategy. This is where decision support's guided by the underlying data in a cash flow forecast. There's certainly a whole world of alternative financing and investment available to the right kinds of candidates, and certainly companies that can tell the story and who in any way possible have proved some sort of counter cyclicality and or innovation in the face of the COVID paradigm will have a likely positive outcome to those conversations. But it really does require that you have a sense of what this means. All of these sort of tranches of capital have a different cost of capital and an impact on the company. You just have to start with understanding the sort of cash flows from operations point of your business. And that really does start with some modicum of a forecast. If you have one already, I think you need to dial it up one or two notches so you have more visibility into what's going to happen in the summer. This is ultimately a sort of summarization page of again, what can be a simple or fairly granular 13-week cash flow. So you've got in the columns, sort of the right 3/4 of the page are weeks 1 through 13, which is obviously a 3-month period. And you have some of the basic accounts here tracked. Ultimately, what ends up happening as you, and again, with some of Sven's inspiration, you can probably take what you know about your business already and inform some of these inputs with more economic information. But as you get billings and collections that get pushed out, obviously, if you were to chart this on a graph, you begin to see really clearly in a waterfall or some other visualization that your cash position begins to get compressed. And so, having something like this that illustrates what's going to happen in July, August allows you to course correct today, right? You can't conserve your cash in August to affect August. It's too late, right? So we've got to get ahead of it. I'm also trying to read this, Edward. I'm looking at my version. The other things that show up here obviously are AR, and then depending on how deep you want to go into product segments, divisions, or departments, you'll begin to highlight where energy and focus is required or where things might need to be reconsidered, right? So getting ahead of a underperforming department, product line, or service will very likely have limited resources directed towards the things that are going to affect billings and collections to your customers, and will affect the kind of months 2, 3, 4 of cash in your working capital position. And again, we've laid people off, we've furloughed people, so staying very focused on the 3 or 4 key items that are going to drive the levers in this cash flow forecast are going to be critical. And this is where the cash flow forecast inputs and the decision support really drive cross-functional activity. You've got leadership that then says, let's go and talk to the sales team, delivery team, development team, whoever they may be, to get focused on hopefully a very finite number of 2, 3 key mandates that are going to drive working capital over the next couple of months. Use the SBA, consume that money, tell your story so you can get forgiven, make that a grant. And then let's just get right back to everyone's very, very different strategy before all this. And what do you do in the face of diminished capacity, diminished revenue in some cases, diminished collectability, and how do you steer the business towards emergence? I think in some cases this is going to be existential. Some people may have to consider protecting themselves individually, so be prepared to do that. And again, a cash flow forecast certainly will highlight in the coming months where there are going to be areas of pinch and where you might be able to get performance out of components of the business you hadn't thought of. But ultimately, plan ahead, be ready to tell your story, at least for the PPP forgiveness, but also for the bank, for people that might be interested in helping you go forward, and for the internal stakeholders in the business, right?